Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to this week's Q&A. As always, thank you so much for your questions. And also, as always, if I don't answer your question in this video, then you can go ahead and copy and paste it onto the bottom of this Patreon post, and I might answer it in the next one. Also, don't forget to post any new questions that you have, as well as don't forget to like all the questions that you want answered, because I generally answer them in order of how many likes they have. So let's jump right in. Joey asks, I was wondering if you and the Refold crew were ever going to come out with a monolingual transition deck. I'm actually currently doing the monolingual transition, and it's actually really fun, but it also takes some time. Anyway, I was just wondering and hope everything goes well for you and Refold. Thank you. Yeah, so we might make a monolingual transition deck one day, but it's not very high on our priority list right now. Basically, well, first of all, we'd have to make one deck for every language, but for just a couple reasons, it's not that high on our priority list compared to all the other things that we do want to make first. And basically the reasons for this are that, first of all, the monolingual transition isn't actually that hard even without a deck. Like, we talk about two different kind of approaches you can take to the monolingual transition on the Refold website, and there are other ones outside of that as well. I talked about one on my YouTube channel like 5 or 6 years ago, the way that I personally did it for Japanese, and that worked well. I'm doing it a little bit of a different way right now for Chinese, actually. I'm basically just, as soon as I started making the monolingual transition, I just put the monolingual definition of the target word on every card that I made, and then I'd also have the bilingual definition. And I'd just take a glance at the monolingual one, and if I didn't understand it, then didn't matter, I just read the bilingual one. And if I did understand it, then I wouldn't put the bilingual one on. And I find that just by doing this for a couple weeks, I naturally am starting to get a hang of how monolingual definitions work in Chinese, and I'm just naturally picking up the words that recur often in Chinese to Chinese definitions. So overall, I just kind of feel like it's ultimately not that hard if you come at it with the right mindset and the right strategy. Not that there's one strategy, but you keep trying the different strategies that have been put out there until you find one that works well for you. And this process might be able to be optimized a little bit by having a deck. But the other thing is that by the time you make the monolingual transition, you're going to have a pretty unique knowledge set at that specific point in time, because you're going to have watched different immersion materials than other people, and your brain's naturally going to pick up on things in a different order than other people's. And so the specific deck that you would need to help you make the monolingual transition as efficiently as possible is going to be different than the deck that someone else would need when they want to make the monolingual transition, because you're already going to know some of the words in definitions that other person doesn't know, and that other person might know some of the words that appear in definitions that you don't yet know. So that's another kind of limitation of making a monolingual transition deck, is that really the ideal monolingual transition deck would build on the knowledge that you already have and fill in any of the gaps that are still there in order for you to comfortably understand monolingual definitions. But everyone's going to have different gaps, so it's kind of problematic. But of course, you could make a kind of generic monolingual transition deck that teaches the words that tend to recur very commonly in definitions, but tend to not come up that often outside of definitions, as well as a deck that would help you get comfortable with the patterns, the grammar patterns that tend to be useful in definitions and stuff. And so that would probably help, and we'll probably do that someday, but it's just low priority because it wouldn't be adding that much value. It's already not that hard to make the monolingual transition as it is, and I think coming up with really good beginner decks with example sentences that also teach grammar, that overall would be a much more high value deck that we could make. And so we're probably going to be focusing on that for all the various languages before we would make something like a monolingual transition deck. Jimmy asks, a few years ago in a podcast, you mentioned that you found it harder to talk about abstract concepts in Japanese compared with English. And you attributed that to having read significantly more fiction than nonfiction works. Have you been reading more nonfiction in recent years? And if so, have you found any improvement in your ability to talk about abstract concepts in Japanese? Should one try to intentionally balance the amount of fiction and the amount of nonfiction that they read? Yeah, so I don't remember exactly what I said in that podcast, but what became a lot, basically what's very clear to me now is that the basic deal with language learning is that you can only talk about topics that you've heard talked about in that language many times. So if I want to to talk about, for example, making sushi in Japanese, then I'm going to have to have heard Japanese people talk about making sushi many, many, many times for me to have an intuitive sense of what types of grammar patterns and vocabulary and, verb conjugations or whatever would be natural in order to express those ideas. And if I haven't heard Japanese people talk about sushi a lot, then I can kind of use the other Japanese that I know to come up with a guess of how Japanese people would talk about sushi, but it's probably going to be off because language is highly specific in unpredictable ways. So no matter how good you get, your guesses are never going to be perfect. And so it wasn't that I was bad at talking about abstract concepts just in general. It was just that there were a lot of concepts that I was very familiar with English, like, for example, talking about meditation or personal development or emotional regulation or the economy or cryptocurrency, like a lot of things that I've just heard people talk about a lot in English, and so I'm very comfortable with, that I pretty much never heard people talk about in Japanese because it just never came up in my immersion. And so when I'd go to try to talk about those things, I'd be at a loss for words. But yeah, it wasn't just that I hadn't read enough nonfiction in the abstract or I was bad at talking about abstract concepts in the abstract. It was just for each specific, there were just many specific topics that I was not comfortable with. And some of those topics I've now, consumed more relevant immersion content in Japanese, and so I can talk about better. And a lot of things I haven't, because I haven't even been doing that much Japanese immersion at all in the past couple of years, and I haven't really been that motivated to improve. And so my ability hasn't really changed at all. But yeah, I would basically just say you have to read a lot of books on the subjects that you want to be able to talk about. It's, making the distinction between fiction versus nonfiction is, it's helpful in some ways because, of course, most fiction books don't. Actually, I don't even know if that's true. I think what nonfiction books give you that fiction books don't is just how to present logical arguments, basically, and just how to kind of maybe talk in a more academic and educated style, or not educated, but maybe like intellectual style. And so you do want to make sure that you have some nonfiction. Once you reach stage 4, you definitely want to make sure that you have a decent number of nonfiction books in your immersion content, whatever you call it, circuit, for the reason of, you want to be able to understand and, of course, probably produce that kind of intellectual, logical style of expressing ideas. You want to be able to present logical arguments, and it's probably going to be nonfiction books that you also hear, that you also get exposed to a lot of the really important kind of intellectual topics that are relevant to society and you want to be able to talk about, right? Like if you want to be able to talk about artificial intelligence or the global warming or any of the other real issues that are important in the world, you're probably going to have to read some nonfiction books on those topics in order to become able to do that. So yeah, I'd say if you reach stage 4, and you've never really read a nonfiction book before, you definitely want to get that in for those reasons. But if you're not at stage 4 yet, then it doesn't really matter that much. I'd say if you're not naturally drawn to nonfiction and you're satisfied with reading just fiction, then that's perfectly fine, because up until the end of stage 3, we're talking about trying to reach basic fluency. And none of the things I just talked about are really relevant for basic fluency. It's more about when you're already at basic fluency and you're trying to move towards being more close to native level and really refine your ability. So that is my answer. Lena Beam asks, what do you think would happen to your level of Japanese if you avoided any interaction with the language for many years? Would you forget everything? I know that in the past you have said you spend 3 hours or so a day in Japanese to prevent your ability from getting worse. I don't generally spend that often in Japanese per day. At least I haven't very recently. I don't know when you heard me say that. I've heard that reacquiring language is extremely quick, so does this mean that one could get back virtually all of their ability in a mere few weeks of immersion after not touching the language for years? Something that has been moderately demotivating is the prospect that I could reach a solid C1 level in my target language, French, but either have to spend copious amounts of time each day reading books or watching YouTube, or let it atrophy. So similarly, if I learned multiple languages, the problem would only get worse. What are your thoughts about this? Yeah, so I mean, my direct experience with language atrophy is really limited. Basically, my experience was that, yeah, I spent 5 years doing Japanese pretty much full time. Of course, there was nothing but improvement happening for that entire period. Since leaving that all Japanese all the time period, like around 4 years have passed, I think 4 or 5 years. And for that period, probably, there's been periods where I do 3 or more hours of Japanese per day, and there's been periods where I do virtually no Japanese per day, and it kind of goes up and down like that between that area range. And what I found is that my ability has dropped since its peak, but after dropping a certain amount, like maybe 15%, it just kind of stays around that same area. And as long as, I keep putting in this like between 0 and 3 hours per day on average, it pretty much stays at that level. So what I found is that, yeah, if I wanted to really get back to my peak, like the best I've ever been or better than I've ever been, then I'd probably have to start spending like 4 or 5 hours at least in Japanese every day for a period of time. And then maybe after like a couple months, then I could be fully back at the peak. That's my kind of intuition, but I've never really tried to do it. I mean, there's been times, during the times where I spend more time in Japanese, I get better for that period of time. So from those experiences of like spending a couple weeks doing 3-4 hours a day and then feeling my ability get better, I get the sense that, yeah, if I spent like around 5 hours a day for a couple months, I could be probably better than I've ever been. The other thing is that there's different domains of the language and there's different areas of ability. So it's not like everything atrophies and grows at once. There's specific areas of the language where I probably do continue to get better just from the little bit of Japanese that I continue to expose myself to. Like I still learn words, and maybe like just with my pitch accent perception or my pitch accent intuition, that has continued to just get better. But besides that, like like when I listen to a domain I haven't listened to in a long time, I'll have to like focus harder to understand it in Japanese, and I know that would go away if I like started immersing more. And then like speaking about the topics I speak about a lot, I'm really comfortable with because I talk to my girlfriend in Japanese a couple times a week at least. But on other topics, or if I have to like speak polite Japanese, then it'll be a lot harder. So it's a very complicated equation. But with all that said, to kind of answer your specific questions, what would happen to my level if I avoided the language for many years? Well, what is many years? I think that if I had zero interaction with Japanese for 10 years, I would probably still be at basic fluency. Like if a Japanese person walked up to me and started talking to me, I could probably still understand pretty much everything they say and still respond, even though I might sound really bad. So I think when you've gone as deep as I've gone with Japanese, the atrophy is very slow. Like 10 years wouldn't be enough for me to like totally lose it. If I was at a much lower level, like let's say I only ever reached, B2 in Japanese, then I think the atrophy would be a lot more quick. But, given I spent 5 whole years of my life doing nothing but Japanese and reached a really comfortable level, I feel like, yeah, although it is kind of has like, the ability has gone down since being at its peak, now it's at this level that is like really sturdy, it kind of feels like. And so with very little work, it can stay at that like sub peak level. And yeah, even if I did none for a long time, I think it would probably take 10 years or more before it would get to the point where I like couldn't say I was fluent in Japanese anymore. And then, yeah, I mean, again, I kind of talked about the reacquiring just in terms of my intuition and my direct experience. I mean, it's a different thing. I mean, when you're hearing about people saying that reacquiring their language is quick, I think that's mainly people who are like at a B2 level, and then they drop down to like being back to A1 or A2, and then they get back to a B2 level. I have heard that, yeah, they could be really quick when you do that because you never truly forget anything. Even if you feel like you've totally forgotten something, when you learn it, you just pick it up more quickly. So I think that's kind of the case for that. But I mean, of course, the better you learn a language, the more slowly that you forget it. But yeah, I mean, then you ask that you find it demotivating, that you'll have to like continue to put in a lot of time to maintain your French or let it atrophy. And that's why, and it would get even worse if you learn multiple language. I'm like, yeah, exactly. That's why I'm not interested in becoming a polyglot at all. The deal when you're trying to become a polyglot who speaks like 10 plus languages is that you let most of your languages get really, really rusty, and then you circle back around and kind of like revive them while you let some other languages get rusty. You can't stay at your peak level at all your languages all the time, even if your whole life revolved around language learning. If you are talking about learning more than 5 languages or something, it's not even possible. And even if you have like what I feel now, right, is like, I already found that living in America, it's really inconvenient to try to spend enough time in Japanese to keep my Japanese at the peak level. I mean, not that it's inconvenient. I guess it's just mostly that I'm more interested in doing things in English than doing things in Japanese. And for me, I'm not willing to kind of compromise and do things in Japanese instead of English, simply for the point of keeping my Japanese in tip-top shape, because having my Japanese be 15% better than it is right now doesn't improve my life in any way. But I mean, yeah, I could see if my Chinese was at a similar level as my Japanese, and I wanted to try to keep Japanese, English, and Chinese all at the highest level that they'd ever been at, then my whole life would have to be like very calculated and revolve around using all of these languages in as much as possible. I wouldn't be able to just do whatever I felt like on a given day. And so I think that would be really kind of restricting, and I wouldn't really want to live that type of life personally. And so, and yeah, I'm also not interested in like spending all this time learning a language, but then ever getting so bad at it that, if someone came up and talked to me in that language on the street, I wouldn't be able to do anything with it, right? Or if like a new movie came out in that language I wanted to watch, I couldn't just comfortably watch it with no subtitles. It's like, well, what would have been the point of learning a language if I was then going to not know it anymore afterwards, right? It kind of seems pointless. And so, yeah, that's why ultimately I think I'm probably never gonna like really get serious about getting good at a language after Chinese. I think 3 is definitely enough for me. And I would say for most people whose lives don't really revolve around language learning, I would kind of want to suggest like get really good at it at a foreign language, and then you can enjoy your native language and your foreign language. Or like for a European person who already kind of like learned English by default because they grew up using English on the internet, then like you have your native language, English, and then an additional target language that you intentionally learned as an adult, and you can remain at like a near native level or higher in all 3 of these languages very comfortably. And I'd say that is probably the best way to enjoy language learning and language ability, in my personal opinion. It's a totally different thing if you go on to be a polyglot, and at that point, I mean, from what I've seen, I mean, polyglots seem to have different psychology than normal language learners, but yeah, it kind of just seems like it's not really about being good in all these languages, but they are really attracted by the pursuit of getting good. And so they want to get really good in a bunch of languages, even if that means that they can't maintain their ability in all their languages, at least not all the time. And I think they just have to end up having to make peace with the fact that most of the languages are really rusty at any given point in time, but they can revive them if they want to. But then again, there's also some polyglots, like I guess like Luca. Like if you watch the interview that I did with Luca on my channel, it kind of sounds like, yeah, his whole life is really set up around his languages, and he's very strategically built his life up so that he can use like 5 or 6 languages naturally on a given day. But then again, it's like, I don't, like, that just kind of sounds stressful to me personally. The other thing is, like, if you want to learn French badly enough, like if you want to learn French badly enough that you're going to put in like all this time to get there, but then you don't even want the ability badly enough to, I'm not wording this right. Let me try to word it the right way. It's like, you're learning French because you want to know French for a reason, right? And if the reason should be something like, there's all these things I want to do in French. I want French to be a part of my life. So if you're worried that it's like, oh, that's so depressing, or it's so demotivating that French is going to have to stay a big part of my life in order to not forget it. It's like, well, if you don't want French to be a big part of your life, why are you learning it? That's kind of how I feel. Like Katsumoto had some quote like, learning a language isn't staying at a hotel; it's moving into a house. Meaning that it's something that's going to become part of you. And if you want to be, get really good at a language, then you should be thinking of it in terms of like, this is going to be part of you for the rest of your life. So I think it's kind of an odd mindset to see people wanting to get good at a language and then not wanting to not to have to spend any time with it, you know? So Scott Scrum asks, I was curious about your thoughts on reading along while listening to an audiobook. I remember being a kid in middle school. My English teacher would tell us that reading along in our heads while someone read the text out loud would improve our reading levels. To be more specific, I mean reading novels that you already have level 4 comprehension in at least, and actually reading along, not just listening to the audiobook while skimming the text. Does this also apply to languages you aren't currently fluent in? Do you think this is better or worse than reading raw with only a pop-up dictionary? So you asked, does this also apply to learning languages? But I mean, to be honest, I'm not really sold that this technique would actually work well for helping you get better at reading in your native language. I mean, not to kind of be mean, but I mean, your English teacher in middle school, what does she know about getting better at languages, really? In my experience, you don't have to be that educated to be a middle school teacher, but yeah, I mean, in my experience, I tried that with Japanese on multiple points of like listening to an audiobook and reading along. And I never found it very helpful personally, because a lot of times the audiobook would be faster than I would naturally want to go, or it'd be slower than I'd naturally want to go. And it just feel like I couldn't fully focus on either one. It's like my attention wanted to fully listen or I wanted to fully read. And by trying to do both at the same time, my attention was like subtly going back and forth. And it was just kind of, it made it feel like I couldn't absorb as much from either one. And so, yeah, my personal preference was to do them, to consume them asynchronously. So first you read the text and then you listen to the audiobook as passive immersion. I always felt that to be a lot more helpful because, yeah, reading and listening are just different activities. And I think they use slightly different parts of your brain. And it just felt like I couldn't, I kind of just the same thing I just said. It's like my brain wants to do either or. If I'm trying to do both at the same time, I'm doing neither well. So that was my sense, is that it's better to just do the two separately. But that's just my experience. If you try it and you feel like it's really helpful to you, then I'd say go for it. Minowal asks, how do I approach a target language novel that is way above, or how to approach a target language novel that is way above your level, but you really want to read? When I look up every word, I don't remember anything. When I don't look up every word, I don't know what's going on. I mean, in that case, I would say probably choose a more comprehensible novel. If it's just so above your level that, you know, when you look up the amount you need to look up in order just to not get totally lost, you're looking up so much stuff that you don't even remember what's going on. It's like, okay, it sounds like reading that novel is not going to be very productive because it's just a little bit above your level. So I think the wisest thing would be come back to it in a month or two, and maybe it won't be quite so difficult. So Anton asks, is there a bare minimum amount of Anki that you would recommend for somebody who really hates doing Anki? For more details, whenever I do Anki, I feel like that time would be better spent doing more immersion. I love immersing, and lately I've been skipping Anki altogether and just immersing 4 to 5 hours a day. I'm late stage 2 / early stage 3, and I'm making a lot of progress doing this. However, I'm feeling a little guilty and am worried if perhaps even a little bit of Anki could go a long way. If so, how small can that little bit be? I mean, the way that I think about it is that Anki isn't necessary. There's plenty of people who've successfully learned a foreign language without using a spaced repetition system, and in fact, the vast majority of people who have ever learned a foreign language historically didn't use the spaced repetition system, considering that spaced repetition systems didn't exist for most of history, and even to this day, kind of seems like most language learners still don't use them. So when I hear the word bare minimum, my thought is there is no bare minimum. You don't need it. It's just not necessary. There's plenty of people who've reached the highest levels without it. The way that I think about it is that it just makes you learn more efficiently than you would be doing otherwise. And so in my mind, there's an optimal amount of Anki for every amount of immersion that you're doing. So maybe it's, if you're immersing 3 hours a day, then spending 45 minutes on Anki would be the optimal amount. So if you do any more than that, then your learning is going to be less efficient. And if you do any less than that, your learning is going to be less efficient. It's not to say that you're not going to learn or you're not going to make progress. If you're doing 3 hours immersion a day, you're going to make progress no matter what you're doing. But the closer you are to the ideal supplemental Anki amount, then the faster you're going to improve than if you weren't doing that. So, I would say, if you really just hate doing Anki and you feel like you're making fast progress, then maybe don't worry about it for now. I imagine that a time will come where you start to feel like your lack of vocabulary is what's holding you back, and that there's this sense that there's unlimited vocabulary you don't know, and it's hard to really grow your vocabulary because the words that you need to know are so infrequent that you don't have many opportunities to pick them up, or they're just really obscure. And then you might start to feel that Anki would be a good way to help you deal with this particular issue you're dealing with, and then you'll naturally have more motivation for it. So I'd say in your case, probably what I would suggest is just keep following your intuition, keep doing it for now. If you really are wondering but would things be even better with Anki, then you can make just 5 cards a day and see if that makes a difference. I've only been making 5 cards a day for Chinese for the past 6 months, and I know it definitely makes a difference, especially because I do pretty limited amounts of immersion, yet I really feel my progress, and I'm always noticing the words that I learned in Anki. So in my experience, learning Chinese has just really reconfirmed to me that, the SRS works really well combined with immersion. And I'm pretty convinced that it's more efficient than if you were just immersing without any SRS. But yeah, that's kind of what I'd say. If things are going well for you and you sense that from your own progress, then there's no reason that you need to change anything. But if you're really curious about it, I'd say add a little bit of Anki into the mix and see what it does. If you don't notice any noticeable difference after a month or two, then you can drop it for a while, and you can always come back to it later. Like I talked about, when you're further down the line and starting to feel like it's the lack of knowledge of rare words that is really holding you back the most. Louis Ipsum asks, tips for paying more attention to / getting more out of passive listening. The only real tips I can give is, well, first of all, make passive listening as easy to do as possible. What I did when I was learning Japanese is I had a separate MP3 player. It was always hooked up to headphones that were hanging out of my shirt. It was always on. I didn't even pause it. And whenever I had a few seconds, I'd put it in. And so because it was so easy for me to start passive listening, I would do it in little small pockets of the day that if it wasn't so easy to plug in, I probably wouldn't have bothered doing. So making it really easy. You don't have to do it the exact way I did it. Now I use AirPods, wireless headphones. Most people probably don't use wired headphones anymore. But, one thing you could do that I've thought is you could get an Apple Watch instead of, or another smartwatch instead of a separate MP3 player. Put your passive immersion content on there, and then just have wireless earbuds that you just put in, and then they automatically start playing. That could be a solution that's really good for making it easy. So making it easy is probably the biggest thing. And the second thing is listen to content passively that you've already gone through once actively, especially that you've gone through with intensive immersion. This is what I've been doing with Chinese. I intensively immerse. I'm pausing after every line during my active immersion, looking up all the words I don't know. And that really maximizes my comprehension of that content. And then I passively listen to it over and over again on repeat. And because I've already kind of seen and looked up almost every word in the show, I'm able to really get a lot out of the passive listening. Now, when it comes to paying more attention, it's the whole point of passive listening is that you can't pay that much attention. That's why it's passive, right? The paying attention is for active immersion. When passive immersion, we're talking about you're doing it while you're doing something else, like cooking, cleaning, exercising. And during all those other activities, although, cooking, cleaning, exercising, commuting, these types of things are mostly mindless, they're not 100% mindless. There's moments where you have to pay attention, and also you're just kind of in a more relaxed, spacious mode where you're probably going to let your mind wander a little bit, think about the day, what's happened so far, what's coming up next, And I think it's healthy to do that. So I don't really think you need to worry that much about paying attention when you're doing passive listening. Instead, just put content that you're interested in and that you've consumed once before, and that way it'll naturally grab your attention more than it would otherwise. So yeah, I'd say you don't want to stress yourself out too much with passive listening. That's what active immersion is for. Passive listening is where you get additional exposure to the language in a kind of stress-free way. So Levy asks, I'm wondering about your current thoughts on using Morphman as a substitute for sentence mining. I believe the Refold website presents it as an alternative, but it doesn't go into the details on whether it's recommended or who should use it over traditional mining. Personally, I found that Morphman saves me massive amounts of time creating cards so that I can put that time into immersion. And as a full-time college student, this is a really big deal. I've also found that the cards are really high quality if downloaded from a Subs to SRS deck catalog. Do you recommend using Morphman for people who don't have a ton of time to immerse as a way of saving time? What does the use of Morphman sacrifice? For context, I'm around 10 months into Refold and towards the beginning of stage 2B. I have around 3,000 bilingual sentence cards. I mean, if you're using Morphman and it's working really well for you, then I'd say just keep doing it. There's no reason to get rid of it or change. Just personally, I don't like Morphman for a bunch of different reasons. So first of all, let me tell you about how I do mine so you have some contrast. For Chinese, I've been exclusively using MPV and MPVacious. So I have a Chinese show and the accompanying subtitle file downloaded to my computer. I watch them in the program called MPV, and I use this MPV script called MPVacious that directly connects with Anki, and I can make an Anki card that has audio and a picture with one button press. And so I can make higher quality cards than Morphman would give me, much higher quality, virtually instantaneously. Like, including adding the definitions and everything, it takes like probably 20 to 30 seconds to make a card. And the thing is, a lot of the times, the card that I'm making isn't for one single subtitle line. I will actually want 2 subtitle lines next to each other, maybe even 3 subtitle lines. And MPVacious lets me select it lets you connect together multiple subtitle lines and really easily choose the starting and stopping line. And I just find that when I make a card in the process of watching, it creates a much stronger memory because I really remember exactly what the scene was. Like when I'm watching a scene, I'm actually into the show, I'm into what the characters are saying, I'm invested in the plot, and a character says something, and there's a word I don't know in what they said, and so I didn't understand it, and I'm like, oh, I really want to know what they mean. And then I look up the word, and then the sentence makes sense, and then it's like, oh yeah, it totally makes sense that, this guy is saying this thing to this girl. And then I make the card. For the rest of that card's life, every time it comes up, I remember exactly what the scene was and what that context was. And so I learn the word much more deeply. It's not just that sentence that is helping my brain understand the word. It's actually the whole context of the scene that is helping my brain not only remember the meaning, but understand the meaning and the nuance that word had when I came across it. It also just makes it very enjoyable because I remember, like, the cards just feel significant to me because I remember the scene. And I feel like even if I watched the show and then had Morphman feed me sentences from that exact show I just watched, it wouldn't be quite as meaningful. It would still be perfectly fine, right? It's not detrimental. It's just, it wouldn't be quite as nice if it wasn't me who added that sentence, and if it wasn't right when I was first viewing that scene. There's something about the timeliness aspect of it, of I'm adding the card and I'm looking up the word in the moment that I came across it in this scene that I was in the context I was invested in. So when I think about using Morphman, it's like, well, it would just be worse in every way because, first of all, it wouldn't save me that much time because making the cards exactly how I like them, including choosing the ideal definition and everything, it only takes like 20, 30 seconds per card. And so I have no problem doing it while I immerse. And actually, I'll add in sometimes when I have less time or I'm feeling really tired, I'll actually just add the card without the definition. Like, I'll literally just press the add card button on MPVacious, which creates a new card that has the picture, the sentence, and the audio. And then I'll just review in Anki, and when that card comes up as a new card, I'll look up I'll add the definitions to the card then. I will always look up the words as I'm actually watching, like with the pop-up dictionary, but sometimes I won't bother to like go and put them on the card and everything. So in that case, adding a card literally only takes like 2 seconds because I'm just literally pressing a button. And so time saving isn't really a relevant factor. And then on Morphman, you don't get to choose the starting and stopping of the lines. You just get one subtitle line, and a lot of times it's going to be out of context. A lot of times it's not going to actually be truly I+1, because being I+1 or one target, it's not just a matter of there being one unknown word. It's crucial that there's one unknown word, and then after you learn that unknown word, you become able to understand the sentence as a whole. And it's hard to really tell if you're understanding the sentence as a whole if you're not, in the process of consuming the larger context, and you can really tell if that sentence fits into the larger context, right? Sometimes you just see a sentence out of context and you're like, oh yeah, I think I understand what this means, but really you're misinterpreting it. And if you really were there for the rest of the context of the conversation, it would be clear that your interpretation doesn't really fit. And so there's that component that I feel like I'm missing, and then, like I said, by having, so the sentences aren't going to be as good. I'm going to compromise a lot more. I'm going to go with sentences that maybe I'm pretty sure of, but I'm maybe not totally sure, or it's more likely that there's misunderstandings. And then also I don't get the benefit of adding the cards as I was watching that scene, so I have the deeper connection to it. So overall, yeah, I just feel like Morphman would not save me time and leave me with cards that I have less of a connection to and that are lower quality. So that's why I feel like, why use Morphman? It's also just kind of clunky. Like, the program is very clunky. It's hard to get working properly. It constantly has glitches. It constantly feeds you cards that don't teach you anything. They're actually, zero target, or that actually you don't understand at all, or it's trying to teach you a person's name or something that's not a real word. So yeah, I just found that it's all the hassle, and it's just doesn't add anything to the setup I already have. So if you have a small amount of time, I would recommend downloading stuff with subs and then using MPVacious to watch it. And that's why personally I don't recommend Morphman, but at the same time, everyone's different. And so if you have Morphman working for you and it's working well, then, like I said at the very beginning, there's no reason to change. So it's not like I'm saying there's some kind of detriment that, it's going to harm you or something. For me personally, I just feel like there's better ways. So I'm not really that much of a proponent of it. Honestly, I guess it was really MPVacious that changed everything and like really made Morphman not worth it in my book. Before MPVacious, subs to SRS was the only good way to get cards with audio in a convenient fashion. I mean, still there was the ShareX method. That was still pretty good, but still was like a little bit more of a hassle. But I guess now that MPVacious is here, it kind of just feels like the pinnacle of sentence mining. So Christoph asks, "Hi Matt, how would you rate passive listening during work or walking the dog? At the moment, I try to listen in the background as much as possible to the things I already have watched actively. I'm interested in your opinion on how beneficial do you think this is?" I mean, I think it's beneficial. That's why we've put it in Refold. Basically, the way that I think about it is that attention is a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, you have intensive active immersion, or I mean, I guess even in free flow, you can still be, fully paying attention, where you're locked in, all your brain power is going towards processing the language, and you're not distracted in any way. And on the opposite end, you have language just playing in the background, but you're completely ignoring it, and you're not really hearing it at all. So basically, this is the spectrum of attention, and the closer you are to the side of paying attention, the more benefit you're getting in that moment. So if you're walking the dog and there's like 5 minutes where you're paying attention so much it's basically active immersion, well, for those 5 minutes you were almost getting active immersion. Then if there's a 5 minutes after that where you're like looking at the scenery and kind of thinking about your day, and then maybe your attention drops to somewhere in the middle or even towards the low end, and so you're still getting some benefit, but it's less. And so with passive listening, your attention is going to be kind of pretty variable. It's going to be moving fluidly across the spectrum. And it also just depends on the context. Like if you are driving, maybe you're able to get really close to the active immersion side because, driving is totally unconscious for you. Whereas maybe if you are, cooking something and you're a chef, then maybe it takes a lot of your brain power to like be focusing on the cooking, and so it's on the lower end. So I don't know exactly how much attention you pay to your listening while you're working or walking the dog, but basically just think about it as the closer you are to active immersion in terms of how much attention you're paying, the closer that you're going to be to gaining the same level of benefit as if you were doing active immersion. And even if you're somewhere on the middle of the spectrum, I still think it can be very beneficial, especially combined with everything else. And it's also kind of like free, because you do passive listening during the periods of time where you couldn't do active listening anyway. So whatever benefit you're getting, it's just on top of everything else. It's not like you're sacrificing active for passive. So yeah, I can't really have any specific metric of like exactly how beneficial is passive immersion at different places on that attention spectrum, but my experience and intuition is that yeah, it's beneficial. The more you listen to the language, the better you get at it. Sulaith asks, if you're feeling very low on motivation, and even with mnemonics you struggle to grade like a quarter of your cards correctly, do you think it's fine to go at a lower pace and have days where you only review cards and not learn new ones? Yeah, I think that's totally fine. That sounds like a good strategy to deal with a dip in motivation. Braden Porter asks, I'm at the beginning of JP1K, about 200 cards in. How much reading do you recommend? Kind of a stupid question, but is there a correct way to read at my level? I wouldn't recommend reading if you're still at the JP1K. Basically, I would recommend going and reading the Refold roadmap. We recommend that you don't really get into reading until like stage 2B at the earliest, and more likely stage like 2C. Before then, when you're in stage 1 or 2A, you should just be focusing on watching with subtitles and not really reading. And I think we explain why in the Refold roadmap, why trying to read when you're that early on is just not going to be the most productive use of time. I mean, basically, you want to be... The more comprehensible your input is, the better, and watching things with subtitles is just inherently going to be more comprehensible, so it's going to be a better use of your time than trying to just read like a book or something like that. Also, it's not really realistic to read a book when you very first started off and you only know 200 words. Like, you're not going to understand anything, and it's just not going to be that productive, in my opinion. Quinn Johnson asks, I'm learning Spanish, and I recently just made a friend from Mexico through italki. After the first formal lesson, we instead agreed to start doing a more casual language exchange thing instead, where we casually talk in Spanish half the time and in English the other half of the time, therefore saving us both money in English and Spanish lessons respectively. I initially reached out to him because I thought I was ready, but the more I talk to him, the more shitty I feel about my level in Spanish. Like, I can hold a conversation more or less, but it's very clunky, and I know I still sound pretty awkward, and that I make big grammar mistakes in my speech quite often. I'm afraid I might have started output too soon. While we only talk like once or twice a week for an hour, I'm wondering if I should basically tell him that I can't talk anymore because I'm not good enough, and then go back to immersing and do even more extensive shadowing before trying to talk and establish a relationship with a native again. Do you think it's harmless to just keep talking with him like once or twice a week in broken Spanish, or should I stop talking to him altogether and just make more time going through stage 3 for a while, and just take more time going through stage 3 for a while? I mean, I would say that, yeah, it sounds like maybe you weren't really ready to output yet. I don't think that speaking for 1 or 2 hours a week is going to do any real harm. I don't think it's really going to benefit you either, besides maybe it provides motivational benefit if you notice yourself improving week after week. Personally, maybe reduce it to once a week, and then you can continue on with it, and yeah, you can use it as a measure of whether your output is naturally getting better because of your input. And also, at 1 hour a week, you don't really have any serious worry about building bad habits, especially if you're getting a lot of input. So, yeah, I mean, with the 2 hours, I just think of it's like, well, past 1 hour, I mean, it would be more valuable to just put that hour into like focused, intensive immersion rather than talking, I would think. But yeah, that's probably been my advice. You're fine at that small of an amount, but yeah, you're fine. Ian asks, is there an amount of words that I would need to know before I move on to stage 3? Nope. All the stages in Refold have kind of specific criteria for when you can move on to the next. So basically, well, stage 1, the criteria isn't so important because you can basically start stage 2 whenever you want and then do the rest of stage 1 alongside that. The important thing is that to complete stage 2, you have to have a certain level of comprehension based on the levels of comprehension model. And then to move on from stage 3 to stage 4, you have to be comfortable enough with speaking and writing in your language. So you said before I move on to stage 3, so all that matters is your comprehension. You don't really have to think about it in terms of levels of words. If you can take slice of life content in your target language and understand it at level 5 comprehension, then you're good enough to move on to stage 3. And you're going to have to know a lot of words for that to be realistic, because part of the description of a level 5 comprehension is that there's a very, very, very small amount of words you don't know. So there's no real need to think about how many words you need. Just think about how much am I understanding based on the levels of comprehension model. So those are all the questions that I had. I think those are all the questions that had at least one upvote on them. So, it only took me 45 minutes to get through them this week. So definitely leave more questions. Definitely upvote questions that you want answered. And thanks so much for being a Refold patron. So I felt like I was rambly this week. Not quite sure why. Maybe it's because I'm just ate lunch before I filmed this. I'm a little tired or something. But anyway, hope I wasn't completely incoherent. And best of luck with your guys' studies.